300 miles northeast of Tahiti, the GPS unit started acting up. I was sitting at the nav station, checking our position against the morning sun sight I'd taken an hour earlier. Everything looked good. Steady 15-knot trades pushing us northwest, autopilot holding course, yacht cutting through 2-foot swells like she was built for it. Which she was. 40 feet of Italian craftsmanship, all carbon fiber and teak trim, the kind of boat that costs more than most people make in a decade. The screen flickered. Just once, like a fluorescent bulb thinking about dying. I tapped the display. Numbers wavered, steadied. Our position showed as 14 degrees 23 minutes south, 151 degrees 47 minutes west. Right where we should be, halfway through day 3 of what was supposed to be a routine 5-day passage to Honolulu. Then the screen went black. I hit the power button. Nothing. Checked the breaker panel. GPS circuit was good, 12 volts flowing clean. Tried the backup unit mounted above the chart table. Same result. Dead as yesterday's fish. 15 years I'd been doing these repositioning runs, and I'd never lost both GPS units at the same time. Hell, I'd never lost one. The yacht rolled through a bigger swell, and I felt that familiar tightness in my gut. Not seasickness. I'd gotten over that my first year on the water. This was different. The kind of unease that comes when the ocean reminds you how small you really are. I pulled out the sextant case from the nav table drawer. Brass and mirrors, same technology Magellan would have recognized. My dad taught me celestial navigation when I was 16, said electronics were fine, but stars don't lie and they don't break down. Smart man, my dad. The sun was getting high, close to noon. I'd need to shoot it at Meridian Passage to get a decent position line. Until then, dead reckoning would have to do. I spread the paper chart across the table. Pencil marks showed our track from Papeete. 3 days of careful plotting. Course corrections for current and leeway. The methodical work that keeps you alive out here. Without GPS, I was back to the old ways. Compass, speed log, time and distance calculations. This particular run was for Johnny Vargas, some tech investor from San Francisco who'd bought the yacht at a boat show in Monaco. Guy probably spent more on lunch than I made in a month, but he paid on time and didn't ask stupid questions. He wanted his new toy waiting for him in Honolulu, ready for weekend trips around the islands. I'd picked up the boat in Tahiti, after she'd been shipped there from the Med. Clean survey, full fuel and water, provisions for 7 days. Standard repositioning job, the kind I could do in my sleep. Except now I was flying blind. The compass showed our heading steady at 320 degrees. Speed log read 6.5 knots. I marked our estimated position on the chart, working backward from the last GPS fix. Dead reckoning isn't rocket science, just careful bookkeeping and honest arithmetic. But when I ran the numbers, something felt wrong. The wind had been steady all morning, same direction, same strength. Current tables showed we should be getting a half-knot push to the northwest. Simple math put us right on the planned track, maybe 5 miles ahead of schedule. The problem was the math didn't account for the GPS dying exactly when it did. I'd been making small course corrections all morning, tiny adjustments to compensate for wind shifts and current. Without those electronic breadcrumbs, I was guessing at where those corrections had taken us. I plotted 3 different scenarios on the chart. Best case had us 10 miles south of the planned route. Worst case put us 40 miles off course, heading into empty ocean where the next landfall was 1,000 miles away. My mouth went dry. 40 miles might not sound like much, but out here it was the difference between making Honolulu on schedule and running out of fuel in the middle of the Pacific. I checked the fuel gauges. 700 gallons across both tanks, enough for maybe 600 miles at current consumption. We had roughly 800 miles to go. The margin for error had just disappeared. I took another look at the chart, studying the depth contours along our planned route. Most of the passage ran over the Tahiti-Hawaii seamount chain, deep water but well mapped. Depths ranging from 2,000 to 4,000 meters. Nothing unusual for this part of the Pacific. But if my worst-case dead reckoning was right, we were heading into a section marked with sparse soundings. Old data, maybe from survey ships decades ago. The kind of area where modern charts still carried the warning. Depth information incomplete. I rolled up the chart and went topside to shoot the sun. The noon sight gave me a latitude line, but longitude would have to wait until evening. Still, the numbers confirmed what I'd been afraid of. We were south of track, maybe 35 miles off the planned route. I plotted the new course to Honolulu. 345 degrees, straight into that blank section of the chart. The depth sounder was reading 4,000 meters when I noticed the bottom starting to drop away. Slowly at first, then faster. 5,000 meters. 6,000. 7. I checked the chart again. According to the sparse soundings, we should be crossing a plateau around 3,000 meters deep. The depth sounder kept climbing. 8,000 meters. 9. That's when I realized we were sailing over something that wasn't supposed to exist. A trench cutting across the ocean floor, deep enough to swallow mountains. The kind of geological feature that takes millions of years to form and shows up on every survey ship's sonar. Except it wasn't on my chart. I stood at the nav station, watching those numbers climb toward 10,000 meters, feeling like I'd sailed off the edge of the known world. 15 years of experience told me to trust the instruments, trust the charts, trust the accumulated knowledge of every navigator who'd passed this way before. But the depth sounder kept climbing, and the chart showed nothing but empty blue. The second night, I was doing my usual deck check around 10:30. Routine stuff, checking the running rigging, making sure nothing had worked loose during the day's sail. The trades had been steady all afternoon, maybe 18 knots from the southeast, and the yacht had been eating up the miles with that easy rhythm you get when everything's dialed in right. I was up by the mast, running my hands along the port shrouds, feeling for any vibration that might mean a turnbuckle backing off. That's when I noticed it. The water. It had gone dead still alongside the hull, not just calm, still, like someone had poured oil on the surface, or like the ocean had just stopped. The yacht was still moving through it, maybe 6 knots, but the water wasn't behaving right. No bow wave, no bubbles streaming back along the waterline. Just this glassy, mirror-perfect surface that didn't make any sense. I straightened up, squinting into the darkness beyond the spreader lights. The moon was maybe half full, giving enough light to see the horizon, but not much else. Everything looked normal out there, just open ocean rolling away in all directions. But right beside us, dead calm. I walked back to the cockpit, checking the wind instruments as I went, still showing 18 knots apparent. The sails were still pulling, main and jib both drawing clean. The autopilot was humming along, compass steady on 295. Everything normal, except for that water. I hit the deck spotlight switch and grabbed the handle, swinging the beam across the surface. White light cut through the darkness, throwing everything into sharp relief. The water looked black as engine oil, so still I could see the yacht's reflection like we were tied up at a marina. That's when something broke through. The sound hit me first, like canvas tearing, but deeper, louder, like someone ripping apart a sail the size of a building. Then the water erupted maybe 20 feet off the port beam, and this thing rose up alongside us. I got maybe 3 seconds to take it in. 3 seconds before my brain shut down and started making excuses. It was shark-shaped, but wrong. Too big. Way too big. I've seen great whites before, back when I was running charters off the California coast. 18-footers that looked like submarines when they came up to investigate. This thing made them look like minnows. 60 feet. Had to be. Maybe more. Hard to judge distance when your hands are shaking and the spotlight's jumping around. But the damn thing stretched from the cockpit all the way past the bow. Its head was bigger than my dinghy. The skin wasn't right either. Sharks have that smooth torpedo look, built for speed, built for efficiency. This thing's hide was mottled and textured, like leather that had been left out in the weather too long. Patches of gray and black and something that might have been green, all blotched together in patterns that hurt to look at. But the eyes... Christ. The eyes. They caught the spotlight beam and threw it back like amber glass. Not the black, dead stare you get from a shark. These things were alive, burning with this phosphorescent glow that seemed to come from inside, like someone had lit a fire behind colored glass. The creature hung there for what felt like an hour, but was probably just seconds. Close enough that I could see the gill slits working, see the scarred texture of its hide, see those burning eyes tracking the spotlight beam as I tried to keep it steady. Then it moved. Not fast, not aggressive. Just deliberate. It rolled away from the yacht and started circling, and that's when I saw the dorsal fin. The thing stood maybe 4 feet out of the water, cutting through the surface like a black sail. The wake it threw was bigger than what I'd get from a 40-foot sport fish running at full throttle. The yacht started rocking, pitching and rolling as the swells hit us from different angles. I gripped the spotlight handle with both hands, trying to track the fin as it carved a wide circle around us. Once. Twice. The beam kept losing it, sliding off into empty water, then picking it up again as it came around for another pass. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I could hear it over the wind, over the sound of water slapping against the hull. My mouth had gone dry as sawdust. Then the fin disappeared. No splash. No sound. It just slipped under the surface like it had never been there at all. The water went back to normal, regular ocean swells, the bow wave streaming back along the waterline, everything the way it should be. I stood there in the cockpit, still holding the spotlight, still scanning the water for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just black ocean rolling away in all directions. My hands were shaking when I finally switched off the light. I set it down in the bracket and gripped the cockpit combing, trying to get my breathing under control. Basking shark, I told myself. Had to be. They get big, maybe 30, 35 feet. And they come to the surface at night sometimes, feeding on plankton. The light could have made it look bigger than it was. Tricks of perspective, shadows on the water, that kind of thing. But basking sharks don't grow 60 feet long, and their eyes don't burn like that. First light showed me what I didn't want to see. I'd been up since 5:30, couldn't sleep after that thing in the water, made coffee, checked the instruments, tried to convince myself it was all shadows and imagination. But when the sun climbed high enough to cut through the morning chop, I knew I had to look. The mask and snorkel were in the stern locker where they always were. I'd used them plenty of times to check the prop or clean the through hulls. Never thought I'd be using them to figure out what kind of monster had been circling my boat. Water was crystal clear this far from land. Visibility had to be 60, 70 feet easy. I spit in the mask, rinsed it out, pulled it on. The routine calmed me some. Just another maintenance check. But my hands were shaking when I lowered myself over the transom. The gouges started about 3 feet below the waterline and ran parallel to the keel for maybe 15 feet. Deep scratches in the gel coat, 4 of them side by side, each one perfectly spaced, like fingers dragging across the hull. I floated there, staring at them through the mask. The marks were too clean, too deliberate. Coral would have left ragged tears. Floating debris would have been random, chaotic. This was different. This was methodical. I traced the first groove with my finger, feeling the ridge where something had scored the fiberglass. The scratch was maybe an inch wide, carved deep enough to expose the darker substrate beneath the white gel coat. Whatever made it had serious power behind it. The pattern told the story I didn't want to read. 4 parallel lines, evenly spaced, running stern to bow along the port side. I kicked down to get a better angle, holding my breath to stay neutral in the water. That's when I saw the second set. These ran crosswise to the first, shorter scratches that intersected the long grooves about halfway down their length. Like something had changed its grip, shifted position to get a better feel for the hull's construction. My chest started burning, needed air. I surfaced fast, pulled the mask off, treaded water next to the stern ladder. The yacht bobbed above me, white fiberglass gleaming in the morning sun. 42 feet of precision engineering, built to handle anything the ocean could throw at it. Storm waves, high winds, equipment failures. I'd dealt with all of that over the years. But this was something else. Something had spent the night testing my boat's strength, probing for weak spots like a predator sizing up its prey. I hauled myself back onto the swim platform, water streaming from my shorts. The deck felt solid under my feet, reassuring in its familiarity. But I couldn't stop thinking about those scratches, the deliberate way they'd been carved into the hull. The endless blue stretched in every direction. No land, no other vessels, nothing but water and sky for hundreds of miles. Out here, the yacht was my world, my only protection against the vast indifference of the Pacific. And something down there had been mapping its vulnerabilities. I dried off with a towel from the cockpit locker, mind racing through the possibilities. Could have been a whale. Maybe a curious humpback investigating the hull. But whales didn't have claws, didn't leave marks like that. The instrument panel glowed reassuringly when I checked the hull integrity readings. All systems green. No water intrusion detected. The scratches hadn't penetrated the hull itself, just scored the outer gel coat. The yacht was still seaworthy, still sound. But that didn't make me feel any better. I poured another cup of coffee, hands steadier now but mind still churning. The creature, whatever it was, had approached with purpose. It knew exactly what it was doing down there, methodically examining the hull like a marine surveyor checking for defects. The thought hit me like a cold wave. Reconnaissance. That's what it had been doing. Not random curiosity or territorial display, but systematic intelligence gathering, learning the yacht's construction, its strengths and weaknesses, preparing for what came next. I stood in the cockpit, coffee mug warming my palms, staring at the water that had seemed so peaceful an hour ago. Now every ripple looked threatening, every shadow beneath the surface a potential predator. Something down there had spent the night studying my boat with the patience and deliberation of an apex predator. And I was still 3 days from Honolulu, alone on an ocean that suddenly felt far less empty than I'd believed. The third night, it came back. I was below deck around 11, checking the engine room one more time before turning in. Routine maintenance stuff. Oil levels, coolant, belt tension, everything normal. The yacht rolled steady in the swells, diesel purring smooth as always. Then I felt it. Not a bump exactly. More like someone had reached up from below and given the rudder a gentle tap. Just enough pressure to register through the hull, through my feet on the deck plates. I froze. Listened. The engine kept its rhythm. Waves slapped against the hull. Wind hummed through the rigging topside. Normal ocean sounds, all of them. But something had changed. The way you know someone's watching you even when you can't see them. I climbed back up to the cockpit, moved quiet as I could. The running lights cast their usual red and green glow across the water. Navigation displays showed steady course, steady speed. Everything looked exactly like it should. Then the second impact came. This one was harder. Definite contact with the rudder assembly, maybe the prop shaft too. The whole stern shuddered just slightly, enough to make me grab the wheel. My mouth went dry. Whatever was down there, it wasn't playing anymore. The third hit came 30 seconds later, strong enough to push the bow off course by 2 degrees before the autopilot corrected. I felt it in my bones, deliberate, calculated force against the most vulnerable part of my steering system. I disengaged the autopilot, took manual control, brought us around 15 degrees to port, hoping to shake whatever was following us. The impact stopped. For maybe 10 minutes, I thought I'd lost it. The yacht settled back into her rhythm, cutting through the swells like nothing had happened. I started to relax, started thinking maybe I'd spooked it after all. Then I saw the wake. Parallel to our course, maybe 50 yards off the starboard beam. A long, smooth disturbance in the water, keeping pace exactly. No phosphorescence this time, no glowing eyes. Just that telltale line where something massive moved just beneath the surface. I adjusted course again. 20 degrees to starboard this time. The wake adjusted with me. Whatever was down there, it wasn't following my rudder movements or my prop wash. It was following me. Like it understood that changing course meant I was trying to escape, and it had decided escape wasn't an option. My hands started shaking on the wheel. I cut the engines. The yacht immediately started to slow, losing way as the trades took over. No more prop noise, no more engine vibration. Just the sound of water against the hull and wind in the sails. The wake moved closer. Now it was maybe 30 yards out, still parallel but tightening the distance. I could see it better without the engine noise. A long dark shadow beneath the surface, moving with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of perfect evolutionary design. It was circling. Not aggressive. Not yet. Just evaluating. I spent the rest of the night pacing the deck. Couldn't sit still, couldn't go below. Every few minutes I'd check the water, looking for any sign of movement. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of that shadow, always just at the edge of the light's reach. Always watching. I'd been at sea for 15 years, encountered plenty of marine life in that time. Bull sharks off Baja that would take a chunk out of your dinghy if you got careless. Humpback whales that would surface so close you could smell their breath. Aggressive pods of dolphins that would harass fishing boats for hours, stealing bait and tangling lines. But nothing had ever hunted me like this. By dawn, I was exhausted but wired. The creature had vanished with the first light, same as before. But I knew it would be back. And next time it might decide that testing was over. I kept thinking about that unmapped trench on my chart. The one that showed up on the depth sounder but didn't exist on paper. What if something lived down there that had never been documented? Something that had evolved in isolation, in pressures and conditions that marine biologists had never studied. What if I was the first human it had ever encountered? The thought made my skin crawl. Because if that was true, then I was dealing with something that had no frame of reference for human technology, human behavior, human limitations. Something that was learning about all of those things in real time. And I was still 2 days from Honolulu. The fourth night, I was ready for it. I'd spent the day rigging up my old cannon on the stern rail. the one I used to document damage for insurance claims. Waterproof housing, good low-light capability, wide-angle lens. If that thing came back, I'd have proof. Something to show people when I got to Honolulu. Something to make them understand I wasn't losing my mind out here. The camera sat there like a patient eye, pointed aft where the creature always seemed to surface first. I'd tested the motion sensor twice, made sure the battery was topped off. Everything ready. Around midnight, the water went still again. Same as before, that sudden absence of normal ocean movement. Like the sea was holding its breath. I killed the cabin lights and moved to the cockpit, spotlight in hand but not switched on yet. Waited. The first ripple came from the port quarter, maybe 50 yards out. Just a disturbance in the phosphorescence, a dark wake where something large had passed beneath the surface. I swung the camera that direction and heard it whir to life, tracking the movement. But when the spotlight beam hit the water, nothing was there. The thing had moved. Had to have. I swept the light in wider circles, catching glimpses of something massive just beyond the reach of the beam. Always just beyond it. Like it knew exactly how far my light could penetrate the darkness and stayed 1 yard farther out. The camera kept recording, following my movements, but I could already tell it wasn't going to capture anything useful. The creature stayed in that perfect zone where the spotlight couldn't quite reach, where it would show up as nothing more than a dark suggestion against darker water. I tried switching off the light, letting my eyes adjust to the starlight. Sometimes you could see more without artificial illumination. The phosphorescence would outline shapes moving through the water, give you a sense of size and direction. There. Off the starboard bow now, maybe 30 yards out, a long shadow gliding just beneath the surface, too big to be anything natural. I brought the spotlight around fast, hoping to catch it before it could react. Empty water. The thing had vanished the moment my hand touched the switch. It knew. Somehow, it understood the connection between the light and my ability to see it clearly. Understood that staying in the shadows would keep it hidden. The fifth night was worse. I'd repositioned the camera, tried different angles, even set up a second one on the port side. Motion sensors active, night vision mode engaged. If the creature showed itself anywhere near the yacht, I'd have it on film from multiple angles. It came earlier that night, around 10:30. I was below deck when I heard the first splash. Not the normal sound of swells against the hull, but something deliberate. Something breaking the surface. I grabbed the spotlight and rushed topside, but the thing was already moving. I could track its wake in the phosphorescence, a bright trail cutting through the water in an irregular pattern. Figure eights around the yacht, then long straight runs parallel to our course, then sudden direction changes that defied any natural swimming motion. The cameras tracked everything, servos whining as they followed the disturbances in the water. But every time I tried to illuminate the creature directly, it would dive or change course, staying just outside the cone of light. I started to understand the pattern. The thing wasn't just avoiding my spotlight. It was studying my behavior, learning how I responded to its movements. When I aimed the beam port, it would surface starboard. When I swept the light in wide arcs, it would hold position directly astern where the camera couldn't track. It was playing with me, testing my reactions, my equipment, my limitations. The sixth night, I didn't even bother with the spotlight at first. I sat in the cockpit with the cameras running, watching the water by starlight alone, waiting to see what the creature would do when I didn't immediately try to illuminate it. It surfaced closer than ever before, maybe 20 yards off the port beam, a long, dark shape that displaced enough water to rock the yacht in its wake. I could see the phosphorescence streaming off its body as it moved, outlining something massive and serpentine. My hand moved toward the spotlight switch. Stopped. The creature held position, floating just beneath the surface, waiting. I realized it was watching me as intently as I was watching it. Those burning eyes I'd glimpsed that second night, they were fixed on the cockpit, on me. It knew I had the light, knew I wanted to use it, and it was curious to see what I'd do. I kept my hand away from the switch. The creature drifted closer, maybe 15 yards now, close enough that I could make out details even in the dim starlight. The massive bulk of its body, the way the water moved around it, the deliberate precision of its movements. Then I made the mistake of reaching for the camera controls, trying to zoom in for a better shot. The creature vanished instantly. One moment it was there, a dark presence in the water. The next moment, nothing but empty ocean. Like it understood exactly what the camera was for, exactly what I was trying to accomplish. Each morning, I reviewed the footage with growing frustration. Hours of dark water, distant splashes, shapes that could be anything. Waves, shadows, tricks of light and perspective. Nothing that would convince anyone I wasn't hallucinating or making things up. The creature had been careful, deliberate in its concealment. It knew about cameras, understood their purpose, their limitations, knew to stay just beyond clear focus, just outside definitive documentation. By the 7th morning, the realization had settled over me like a cold weight in my chest. This wasn't some primitive sea creature acting on instinct. This was something intelligent, something that comprehended human technology and human motivations, something that had been studying me as carefully as I'd been trying to study it. I was being hunted by something that understood cameras, something that knew to hide itself from documentation. The footage showed nothing but empty water and distant shadows. Shapes that could be dismissed, explained away, forgotten. Exactly what it wanted. The 5th night, hell, the final night, I was 80 miles out from the Hawaiian coast when the ocean just exploded. I'd been standing watch since midnight, gripping the wheel with both hands, like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality, which maybe it was. 4 nights of that thing circling, studying, learning, 4 nights of feeling like prey in my own boat. The trades had died to nothing around 11, dead calm, flat water stretching to the horizon under a 3/4 moon. That should have been peaceful. Should have been one of those moments that remind you why you love being out here, alone with the stars and the endless blue. Instead, it felt like being trapped in a snow globe. I was checking the GPS for the 100th time, 79.7 miles to Honolulu Harbor, course 295 degrees magnetic, when the water ahead started to bulge. Not waves, not swells. The ocean itself was rising, pushing up from below like something massive was displacing every drop between the surface and the seafloor. My hands froze on the wheel. The yacht kept its steady 6 knots forward, autopilot locked on course, diesel engine humming its reliable rhythm. Everything normal except for the fact that the sea was turning itself inside out maybe 200 yards, dead ahead. Then it breached. Jesus Christ, it breached. The thing came up out of the water like a surfacing submarine, but submarines don't move like that. Don't have that fluid, predatory grace. Don't arch their backs against the stars in a display of pure, impossible mass. I'd seen whales breach before, humpbacks off the California coast, gray whales in the Pacific Northwest. Magnificent animals, 40, maybe 50 feet of muscle and blubber, launching themselves skyward in defiance of physics, beautiful in their own way. This wasn't beautiful. This was something that had been swimming in the deep places since before humans ever built boats, and it was showing me exactly what kind of mistake I'd made coming out here alone. The creature's body kept rising, water streaming off its flanks in sheets that caught the moonlight like liquid silver. 60 feet, 70, more. The math didn't work, couldn't work, but there it was, suspended above the ocean like some fever dream of evolution gone wrong. And then I saw its mouth. For one frozen moment, couldn't have been more than a heartbeat, but it felt like hours. The thing's head turned toward me. Its jaws gaped open, impossibly wide, revealing row after row of recurved teeth that caught the moonlight like broken glass. Each tooth the size of a dinner plate, curved inward to ensure that whatever went down that throat wasn't coming back up. I stood there paralyzed at the helm, every nerve in my body screaming at me to do something, cut the engine, change course, grab the radio, anything. But my hands wouldn't move. My brain had just shut down, overloaded, like staring into the sun or trying to process the moment you realize you're about to die. The creature's eye found me across the water, fixed on me with the same cold intelligence I'd felt for 4 nights running. But this time, there was something else. Recognition, maybe, or satisfaction, like it was finally ready to stop playing games. The thing crashed back into the depths with a sound like thunder, its massive bulk hitting the surface with enough force to send shockwaves through the water in all directions. The displacement was immediate and violent, a wall of water radiating outward from the impact point, bearing down on the yacht with the inevitability of physics. I felt the bow lift as the first wave hit, the yacht climbing what felt like a 10-foot face before dropping into the trough behind it. Then another wave, and another, each one rolling under us with enough force to shake the entire boat from stem to stern. The yacht shuddered through the displaced water like it was having a seizure. Everything loose in the cabin went flying. Coffee mug, chart tools, spare winch handle. I fought to keep my footing as the deck pitched and rolled beneath me, one hand death gripping the wheel while the other grabbed for the nearest handhold. The engine coughed once, twice, then found its rhythm again. Autopilot compensated for each wave, servos whining as they fought to keep us on course. The rigging sang overhead as the boat worked through the confused seas, everything straining but holding. By the time the water settled back to its unnatural calm, the creature was gone. No trace of it except for the concentric ripples spreading outward from where it had breached, and the taste of copper in my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. I didn't sleep for the remaining hours of the voyage, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those teeth, felt that intelligence studying me across the water, weighing my reactions, calculating my limits. I kept every light blazing, navigation lights, spreader lights, cabin lights, even the underwater transom lights that were supposed to attract fish for night fishing. Turned the yacht into a floating Christmas tree, burning through the battery bank like there was no tomorrow. Maybe there wasn't. My hands stayed white-knuckled on the wheel for the next 6 hours, fingers cramped around the rim until I couldn't feel them anymore. Eyes fixed on the water ahead, scanning for any sign of movement, any hint of that massive shape rising from the depths. The radar showed nothing. GPS kept its steady countdown. Depth sounder read 2,000 feet, then 3,000, then off the scale as we passed over the deeper trenches. Everything normal on the instruments, everything wrong in my gut. I counted down the miles to Honolulu Harbor like a man counting his last breaths. 70 miles, 65, 60. Each nautical mile bringing me closer to civilization, to other boats, to the illusion of safety that comes with having witnesses around. The creature didn't show itself again, but I felt it out there, pacing us in the dark water below. Waiting, watching, maybe deciding whether I was worth the effort, or whether I'd learned my lesson about venturing too far from shore. Dawn began to break over the horizon around 5:30, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold that should have been beautiful. Should have been a relief after the longest night of my life. Instead, it just made the water look deeper. The harbor spread out in front of me, forest of masts and rigging catching the early light. Commercial fishing boats tied up at the fuel dock, sport fishers lined up in neat rows, and there, Slip 47, right where the harbor master had told me it would be. Empty space waiting for Johnny Vargas's 60-footer. I brought her round in a wide turn, checking the wind, feeling for current. Muscle memory took over, hands working the throttle and wheel without conscious thought while my mind kept circling back to that thing in the water. The way it had moved with such deliberate purpose. The intelligence in those burning eyes. A figure was walking down the dock toward Slip 47, harbor authority uniform, clipboard in hand, professional greeting party of one, which meant the paperwork would start as soon as I got the lines secured. I reversed thrust, bringing the yacht to a dead stop about 10 feet out from the dock. The woman in uniform, Lexi Richards, according to the badge I could just make out, raised her hand in acknowledgement. Standard harbor procedure. Everything normal and routine. Nothing felt normal anymore. "Good morning," she called out. "You must be Captain Santos. Welcome to Honolulu." "Morning." My voice came out rougher than I'd expected. I cleared my throat, tried again. "Yeah, that's me. Randy Santos, bringing in the Meridian for Johnny Vargas." I tossed her the bowline and she caught it with practiced ease, wrapping it around the cleat with the quick efficiency of someone who'd done this a few thousand times before. I killed the engine and stepped off the stern with the aft line. "Long passage?" she asked, but her tone had changed slightly. Something in my appearance was telling her this hadn't been routine. 5 days from Tahiti. I made the line fast and straightened up, catching my reflection in the yacht's salon windows. Christ, I looked like hell. 5 days of broken sleep, constant vigilance, and mounting paranoia had carved lines in my face I didn't remember having. My eyes looked hollow, surrounded by dark circles that made me appear 10 years older. "Rough weather?" Lexi was studying me with the kind of careful attention harbor masters develop for spotting trouble before it becomes their problem. "No, weather was fine." I rubbed my face with both hands, feeling the stubble rasp under my palms. How do you explain to someone that the ocean had shown you something impossible? That everything you thought you knew about what lived in deep water was wrong? She made a note on her clipboard. "Well, you made good time. Jorge Dunn will be here around 8 to do the inspection. Standard post-voyage survey for insurance purposes. You can grab some breakfast, get cleaned up if you want. Jorge Dunn, Marine Surveyor." Right, Johnny had mentioned that in his instructions. Professional inspection to document the yacht's condition after the passage, make sure his investment hadn't taken any damage while crossing 2,000 miles of Pacific Ocean. The damage. Jesus, I'd almost forgotten about the gouges in the hull. Those long scratches below the waterline that something had carved into the fiberglass with surgical precision. Jorge Dunn was going to have questions about those marks. Questions I wasn't sure I could answer without sounding like I'd lost my mind. "I'll stick around for the inspection," I said. "Want to make sure everything's documented properly." Lexi nodded and made another note. She was in her 50s, I'd guess, with the kind of solid competence that comes from decades of dealing with boat owners, captains, and all the chaos that follows in their wake. Gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, warm brown eyes that missed nothing, and a way of moving that suggested she'd spent plenty of time on boats herself. "You okay, Captain? You look like you've seen a ghost." Close enough to the truth that I almost laughed. "Just tired. It's been a long week." She gave me the kind of look that said she'd heard that excuse before, usually from captains who'd been drinking their way across the ocean or fighting with their crew. But something in my face must have convinced her this was different. because she didn't push. "Coffee's fresh at the harbor office," she said. "Help yourself. And there's a shower in the head if you need it." "Thanks. I appreciate that." I watched her walk back down the dock, clipboard swinging at her side, radio crackling with the morning's first calls from incoming vessels. Normal harbor business. Normal people dealing with normal problems. I wished I was still one of them. 8 o'clock came faster than I wanted. I'd managed a quick shower and a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with harbor water, but I still felt like I'd been run over by a container ship. The coffee helped with the fatigue, but it couldn't touch the deeper exhaustion that came from 5 nights of hypervigilance. Jorge Dunn showed up right on time, carrying a professional-looking toolbox and wearing the kind of clothes that said he took his job seriously. Cargo pants with about 15 pockets, steel-toed work boots, and a polo shirt with his surveyor credentials embroidered on the chest. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that suggested he'd spent time working with his hands before moving into the more technical side of marine work. "Captain Santos?" He extended a hand. "Jorge Dunn, marine surveyor. I'll be doing the post-passage inspection for Mr. Vargas. Randy, good to meet you." His handshake was firm, professional. Behind wire-rimmed reading glasses, dark brown eyes took in my appearance with the same careful assessment Lexi had given me earlier, the kind of look that cataloged details for later reference. "Shall we start with the exterior hull inspection?" He set his toolbox down on the dock and pulled out a digital camera. "Standard procedure. Document the vessel's condition. Note any damage or wear from the passage." "Sure. Though there's something you should probably know about first." Jorge paused, camera halfway out of the case. "What kind of something?" I opened my mouth to tell him about the gouges, about the thing in the water, about 5 nights of pure hell that had redefined my understanding of what lived in the ocean's depths. But the words wouldn't come. How do you start that conversation without sounding like you've cracked under the pressure of solo sailing? "Some hull damage," I said finally. "Below the waterline. Port side, about amidships." He nodded and made a note in his inspection book. "Storm damage, collision with debris?" "Unknown origin." That got his attention. Jorge looked up from his notes, studying my face with renewed interest. In his line of work, unknown origin usually meant the captain was covering up a mistake or didn't want to admit to hitting something that shouldn't have been there. "We'll take a look," he said. "But first, let me run through the standard checklist. Electronics, safety equipment, that sort of thing." We climbed aboard, and Jorge began his methodical inspection. He worked with the kind of thoroughness that made me understand why Johnny Vargas had hired him. Every system checked, every component photographed, every anomaly noted and documented with scientific precision. 20 minutes in, he was examining the emergency equipment locker when his expression changed. "Captain Santos." His voice had gone flat, professional in the way that meant he'd found something significant. "Your EPIRB beacon shows activation during the voyage." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face, hands going cold despite the morning warmth. "That's not possible." Jorge held up the emergency beacon, a yellow plastic device about the size of a thick paperback book. LED indicators along one side showed its status history. "The activation log shows a trigger event at 03:47 hours on..." He checked his notes. "Would have been your 4th night out." 4th night, when that thing had been circling the yacht, studying it with patient intelligence. When I'd felt those deliberate bumps against the hull, methodical and purposeful. "How does it activate?" My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. "Pressure switch," Jorge said. turning the beacon over in his hands. Units designed to activate automatically if the vessel sinks. Water pressure triggers the mechanism, sends a distress signal via satellite. But we didn't sink. No, you didn't. He set the beacon down carefully, like it might explode. Which means something else triggered the pressure switch. Something that applied sufficient force to mimic the water pressure found at depth. I stared at the yellow plastic housing, understanding flooding through me with sickening clarity. The beacon wasn't mounted inside the boat. It was attached to the exterior of the hull, below the waterline, accessible from outside, accessible to something that wanted to understand what it was, what it did, how it worked. The activation was brief, Jorge continued. Less than 30 seconds, just long enough to trigger the mechanism. Then the pressure was released. Something had found the beacon. Something had pressed it deliberately, testing its function, learning about the yacht's emergency systems with the methodical curiosity of a scientist examining a specimen. Jorge, my mouth felt dry. I need to show you that hull damage now. We spent the next 20 minutes in the harbor's dive boat. Jorge suited up with scuba gear to examine the port side below the waterline. I watched from the surface, knowing what he was going to find, dreading his reaction when he saw it. He surfaced after 15 minutes, pulling the regulator from his mouth with hands that weren't quite steady. Captain Santos. He treaded water next to the dive boat, looking up at me with the expression of someone whose professional worldview had just taken a serious hit. I need to ask you again about the origin of this damage. I told you. Unknown. These aren't random scratches. Jorge hauled himself up onto the boat's swim platform, water streaming from his wetsuit. They're precise, parallel, consistent depth and spacing across approximately 12 feet of hull surface. I helped him out of the tank harness, both of us avoiding eye contact. Your professional opinion? Jorge was quiet for a long moment, stripping off his diving gear with the mechanical movements of someone trying to process something that didn't fit his frame of reference. In 23 years of marine surveying, he said finally, I've never seen damage like this. The precision is unprecedented. Whatever caused these marks applied exact pressure across multiple contact points simultaneously. But you have no explanation. No. He coiled the air hose with careful deliberation. No marine life I'm familiar with could create this pattern. No known debris or structural hazard would leave these specific markings. Jorge packed his gear in silence, making notes in his inspection book that I knew would puzzle insurance investigators for months to come. Professional language for an unprofessional situation. Technical terms for something that defied technical explanation. As we headed back to the dock, I watched him struggle with what he'd seen. A man whose career was built on identifying causes, explaining damage, providing rational answers to straightforward questions. Now faced with evidence that challenged everything he understood about marine hazards. I knew exactly how he felt. Back at the yacht, Jorge completed his documentation with the grim efficiency of someone who wanted this job finished. Photographs of the beacon, detailed notes about the activation log, precise measurements of the hull damage that would go into a report no one would quite believe. I'll have the full survey to Mr. Vargas within 48 hours, he said, packing up his equipment. But Captain Santos, off the record? Yeah. Whatever you encountered out there. Jorge paused, choosing his words carefully. I'd recommend avoiding that area in future passages. I nodded, watching him walk away down the dock. Another professional doing his job, filing his report, moving on to the next inspection. But I could see it in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing back at the yacht. Jorge Dunn would be thinking about those hull markings for a long time, Standing alone on the deck of Johnny Vargas's yacht, I finally understood the full scope of what had happened out there. The creature hadn't just been hunting me. It had been investigating my vessel with purpose, with intelligence that defied everything I thought I knew about marine life. It had found the emergency beacon and tested its function, studied the hull and left its marks as evidence of examination, learned about human technology with the patient methodology of a researcher gathering data. And somewhere in the vast Pacific, it was still out there, still learning, still investigating every vessel that crossed its territory with the same deliberate curiosity it had shown mine. I'd made it to Honolulu. I'd delivered the yacht safely to its destination. But I wasn't sure anyone else should risk that crossing until we understood what was waiting in the deep water between Tahiti and Hawaii. I spent the next 3 weeks trying to find someone who could tell me what the hell had carved up that hull. First marine biologist I showed the photos to was Dr. Kessler at the Waikiki Aquarium. Seemed like the logical place to start. Guy who'd spent 30 years studying Pacific marine life, published papers on deep-sea predators, the whole 9 yards. I sat in his cramped office while he pulled up the images on his computer, watching his face for some flicker of recognition. Nothing. He leaned back in his chair, ran a hand through his gray beard, and shook his head. These are remarkable photographs, Mr. Santos. The precision of the scoring, the depth. He zoomed in on one of the clearer shots. But I have to tell you, I've never seen anything like this. What about large sharks? Great whites? Tiger sharks? Wrong pattern entirely. Shark bites leave ragged tears, crushing damage. These are deliberate scratches, almost surgical in their precision. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Squid, then. Giant squid. Dr. Kessler pulled up another image, traced one of the grooves with his cursor. Cephalopod suckers leave circular marks, not linear scratches. And the spacing here. He measured with a digital ruler. You'd need something with claws or talons, spaced roughly 18 inches apart. Nothing in our current taxonomy fits that profile. The second biologist gave me the same answer. Dr. Martinez at the Honolulu Marine Research Center looked at the photos for 20 minutes, cross-referenced them with damage patterns from known species, ran them through some kind of database search. Same result. No match. Have you considered that this might be tool damage? She asked. Perhaps from salvage equipment or underwater construction? I told her about the crossing, about watching whatever it was circle the yacht for 4 straight nights, about those burning eyes in the water. She listened politely, made notes, but I could see the skepticism creeping into her expression. By the time I finished, she was looking at me like I'd been at sea too long, which left me with one last option. Dr. Julie Patel had a reputation for being thorough. Her office at the University of Hawaii was packed with research papers, specimen jars, and detailed charts of Pacific marine ecosystems. When I called to set up the appointment, she'd been cautious but professional, told me to bring the original image files, not just prints. I showed up at her office on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a flash drive with every photo I'd taken of the hull damage, high-resolution shots from multiple angles, close-ups of individual scratches, wide shots showing the overall pattern. Everything I had. Dr. Patel was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 50s, auburn hair with gray streaks, the kind of sharp intelligence that made you choose your words carefully. She loaded the files onto her computer and started working through them systematically. These were taken where? Honolulu Harbor, day after I arrived from Tahiti. She nodded, pulled up a detailed image of the portside gouges. And you observed the animal that caused this damage? Something. I observed something. For the next hour, she examined every photograph with the kind of methodical precision I recognized from my own navigation work. Measurements, comparisons, Notes in a composition book that looked like it had seen years of field use. She pulled reference books from her shelves, cross-checked databases, even made a couple phone calls to colleagues. Finally, she sat back in her chair and looked at me directly. Mr. Santos, in 26 years of marine biology research, I've documented attack patterns from great whites, tiger sharks, bull sharks, oceanic whitetips, and several species of deep-sea squid. Her voice was careful, measured. I've examined damage from sperm whale teeth, orca predation, and giant Pacific octopi. She gestured at the computer screen. These marks match none of those patterns. So, what made them? I don't know. The honesty in her voice hit me harder than the previous dismissals. Dr. Kessler and Dr. Martinez had been polite but skeptical. Dr. Patel was genuinely puzzled, and that was somehow worse. The spacing suggests something large, she continued. The depth indicates significant force. The precision. She shook her head. It's almost like claw marks, but from something we haven't cataloged. Is that possible? Something that big, that aggressive, and we've never documented it? Dr. Patel was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs. The ocean covers 70% of our planet, Mr. Santos. We've explored less than 5% of it. Theoretically, yes. It's possible. She closed the image file, turned to face me. But if something like this exists, if it's capable of this kind of damage to a fiberglass hull, her voice trailed off. What? It would represent a significant predator, potentially dangerous to marine traffic. I felt my last hope for a rational explanation crumble. 3 experts, 3 admissions of ignorance. Whatever had stalked me for 4 nights between Tahiti and Hawaii wasn't in any textbook or database. That afternoon, I called Johnny Vargas and told him I was getting out of the repositioning business. Didn't give him the real reason, just said I was ready for something closer to shore, less time away from home. He seemed disappointed, but understood. 15 years of solo crossings was a decent run by anyone's measure. Within a month, I'd sold my client list and equipment to another captain, packed up my apartment in San Pedro, and driven south to San Diego. Found a job managing Pacific View Marina, 36 slips, mostly day sailors and weekend warriors. Water depth maxing out at 12 feet at high tide. Shallow water. Shore always visible. No deep ocean crossings, no solo watches, no empty blue water stretching to the horizon. The work was easy enough. Dock maintenance, slip assignments, dealing with slip holders who couldn't parallel park their boats to save their lives. Different world from the long-distance sailing I'd been doing, but that was the point. I rented a small apartment 6 blocks from the marina. Could walk to work, walk home for lunch. Never be more than a few minutes from solid ground. After 15 years of solo passages, the constant proximity to land should have felt confining. Instead, it felt like safety. Most nights I slept fine. Steady traffic noise from the street, neighbors moving around upstairs, all the sounds of civilization that reminded you that you weren't alone in the world. But sometimes, usually around 3 in the morning, my phone would buzz. Maritime emergency alerts, automated notifications from Coast Guard systems, distress beacon activations, search and rescue updates. I'd signed up for them years ago. Professional habit, staying aware of conditions and incidents in areas I might be crossing. I should have unsubscribed after taking the marina job. No reason to track emergency situations 1,000 miles away. But I kept the alerts active, told myself it was just old habits. The first one came 6 weeks after I'd settled in San Diego. 3:15 in the morning, phone buzzing on the nightstand next to my bed. Emergency beacon activation. Position, 22 degrees, 8 minutes north. 158 degrees, 42 minutes west. I sat up in bed, grabbed the phone, read the coordinates twice. Then I pulled up the chart app and plotted the position. 80 miles northeast of Honolulu, 40 miles off the standard shipping lanes, directly above the section of ocean where my depth sounder had climbed toward the surface, where something had carved up a fiberglass hull with surgical precision. The follow-up alert came 4 hours later. Search terminated. No survivors located. Debris field consistent with catastrophic hull failure. 2 months later, another alert. Different vessel. Same coordinates. Emergency beacon activated at 2:47 in the morning. Search called off by noon. Coast Guard report mentioned extensive hull damage of unknown origin. Then another. And another. Always the same stretch of water. Always 40 miles off the shipping lanes, where commercial traffic was light and recreational boats were rare. Always above that trench that didn't appear on any chart. I started keeping a notebook by my phone, recording each incident. Date, time, coordinates, vessel type when the reports included that information. After 6 months, I had 11 entries, 11 boats, 11 emergency beacons, 11 searches that ended the same way. I told myself it was coincidence. That stretch of ocean saw enough traffic that statistical clustering was inevitable. Equipment failures happened. Storms developed quickly in the Pacific. There were rational explanations for everything. But late at night, staring at those coordinates on my phone screen, I knew better. Something was still out there, 40 miles off the standard shipping lanes, directly above a trench that cartographers had somehow missed. Something that had learned enough about human technology to avoid the busy shipping routes, smart enough to hunt where help was too far away to matter. Something that was still hunting.